ध्ययेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्. Namo Ramana. We will commence the Friday Atma Vichara session by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. As usual, I'll be reading from the book Ramana Answers, Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on the subject of Atma Vichara and between 1900 to 1950, and it has been compiled for us by our founder, President Sri A.R. Natarajanji. After reading to this week's question and answer given by Bhagavan, the Upadesham, and contemplating on it by his grace, then we will have a 20-minute Atma Vichara session, following which our President Sharda Akka would be talking about Atma Vichara as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita by Ganapati Muni. And finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. In the question and answers that we are looking between 1936 to 1950, the question today is the 17th question, and we look at it both 17th and 18th together. The questioner asks, the devotee asks, what is it that is discriminative in action? Question is, what is it that is discriminative in action? Bhagavan says, discrimination will be automatic, intuitive. Bhagavan's answer to that is, discrimination will be automatic, intuitive. So the devotee says, so intuition alone matters. Intuition develops also. To which Bhagavan says, those who have discovered great truths have done so in the still depths of the self. The questioner says, so intuition alone matters. Intuition develops also. To which Bhagavan says, those who have discovered great truths have done so in the still depths of the self. So Bhagavan, talking about intuition, recognizing that it is the greatest truth and it is the natural way how the self operates. He says, Unayar Arivar Arunachala. How can anyone know you, O Arunachala? That self, the way it operates, the way it manages, is something beyond an understanding. And therefore, Bhagavan says that intuition, that automatic way of functioning of the self is what is the real discrimination. There is no such real discrimination that we can learn by reading or knowing any book. Bhagavan is saying, once when we are in that still depth of the self, then everything happens automatically, happens in the form of intuition. So as I was preparing for this talk about intuition, I went, right now I am in Tiruvannamalai, and I was looking at the talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi and went to the index page to see if there are any specific talks of Bhagavan about intuition. And naturally in the index page, I didn't find the word intuition at all. So I said, what more can be a better intuition than Bhagavan guiding? So just opened randomly the talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, and he took us to talk number 267, 23rd October 1936, which I would like to read here, wherein Bhagavan says, while speaking of the animal's compassion in the hall, Sri Bhagavan quoted a Tamil stanza by Avvai. When the old lady was going along, she heard on one occasion someone praising Kambar. She replied with a stanza which means, each is great in its own way. What is Kambar's greatness when compared with a bird which builds its nest so fine? The worms which give lac, the honeybees which builds the comb, the ants which build cities, and the spider its web. Bhagavan then began to describe their activities. While living on the hill, he had seen a hut built of stones and mud and roofed with thatch. There was constant trouble with white ants. The roof was pulled down and the walls demolished to get rid of the mud which harbored the ants. Sri Bhagavan saw that the hollows protected by stones were made into towns. These were skirted by walls plastered black, and there were roads to neighboring cities, which were also similarly skirted with black plastered walls. The roads were indicated by these walls. The interior of the town contained holes in which ants used to live. The whole wall was thus tenanted by white ants, which ravaged the roofing material above. Sri Bhagavan had also watched a spider making its web and described it. It is seen in one place, then in another place, again in a third place. The fiber is fixed at all these points. The spider moves along it, descends, ascends, and goes round, and the web is finished. It is geometrical. The net is spread out in the morning and rolled up in the evening. Similarly, the wasps build their nest of lac, crude, and so on. So then, each animal has got some remarkable instinct. Cumber's learning is not to be wondered at because it is God's will as it is in the other cases. So it is the instinct. Bhagavan says that each animal has got some remarkable instinct. It's about that intuition that makes it all possible. That is the God's will. And therefore, Unayar Arivar Arunachala. So Bhagavan is saying to all of us that it is absolutely natural that how we all behave, because it is all because of that intuition that is coming out from that one self driving everything. Therefore, it is important to recognize that intuition and not only recognize, rely on it, totally depend on it. And that being quite automatic, Bhagavan is saying that's all that one needs to know. And that can be realized only in the stillness of the self, not with the running thoughts. If we identify with the thoughts and if we identify with our intellect, if we identify with this entire tools that has been given to us as though that we own them and then we can manage them to achieve our objectives or to avert something that has happened, then we lose the entire intuition. We are so busy gathering data about various experiences, about how to manage this life. But if we understand that in the God's will and in his way of doing things, in the way of the self, it's the way it gets it done. Everything happens by instinct. It happens to a small ant, it happens to a big bee, it happens same with all animals, whether it's human, anything alike. So when we understand that it is all perfectly managed way of happening and recognizing that it is the best course for all that is happening. Because if you see that, they say that if a bumblebee goes off, becomes instinct in this universe, the entire life will perish within a few days. And when we see that who goes and tells the bee where the flowers have blossomed, how to pick up, who tells them, who tells everything. And here I am in Tiruvannamalai, my house here, I see the crows assemble on the tree next door exactly at the time that we are having our breakfast inside our house. Who tells them that? It's amazing how they all function, because it is how the Supreme is guiding everyone and making us all work for his cause in a way that is best known to him. So therefore, by recognizing that that force is making us all function in this one big orchestra, and in which we are beautifully, each of us in our own way, are contributing and it all makes sense for him, and as he is guiding the orchestra, by recognizing that, and therefore, as Bhagavan told his mother, that Ishvara residing in the heart of everyone is making them do what is required to be done. And therefore, it becomes, he says that we have to remain only still. And that is what Bhagavan says here, that if we remain still and recognize that everything is being driven automatically by that one, by the intuition of that one self, then we have discovered the greatest truth. So We recognize if somebody comes and scolds us, shouts at us, it's all part of that orchestra. It is all part of that big journey that is being planned. And therefore, recognizing that, we simply remain in the truth and let whatever come, stay however long it wants to stay. And if it has to disappear, let it disappear. And that is the way the self operates. And therefore, that is the right intuition to develop, says Bhagavan. And that is also not something we have to do with effort, because the self is like that in its natural state. Therefore, Bhagavan is saying the real discrimination is automatic and intuitive. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which alone we have come to this most direct path, the natural path, wherein he naturally reveals an effortless state of ourself. And not only he reveals that state as our natural state, he says that by simply remaining in that natural state, all that needs to happen is going to happen automatically for all of us. Not only for the ones who is doing sadhana, it is for everybody. That's how it is functioning. So therefore, it becomes important for us to recognize that highest truth and remain in that stillness of that self. The immense grace of Bhagavan with which we have come to this path for the next 20 minutes, no matter how many thoughts rises within us and whatever may be the nature of the thought, it may be good, bad, or ugly, or even spiritual, all we need to do is inquire to whom is this thought. Therefore, it becomes an opportunity to see the one to whom the thoughts are arising. And the answer would come, it is for me. Thereupon, when we inquire, who am I? What do I refer to as I? And dive to the source of that I, that very grace of the self, which has given us this path of who am I, takes us to that natural self, wherein it is naturally abiding in that stillness. And he makes us establish ourselves in that stillness. And Bhagavan says, by repeatedly getting back to that stillness, experiencing the silence, the peace of the self within, the mind will finally abide in that truth. And the entire thought will get absorbed in that one self and remain and become still. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara. Over to Sharda.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we are meditating on his teachings as self-inquiry through the question answers compiled by Sri Ramanacentre, answers given by him right from 1900 to 1950, and by that immense grace also practice of self-inquiry has happened. And the last part of the satsang, we are meditating on the practice of self-inquiry and the light thrown on it through the questions and answers in the early years or during Virupaksha cave and Skandashram years. And these are questions by Ganapati Muni and many of the disciples of Ganapati Muni put to Bhagavan and compiled by Ganapati Muni as the Ramana Gita in 18 chapters. We are now meditating on the third chapter. The questions are by Daivarata, and Daivarata was a great singer as well, and he used to do bhajans. And it is said that his bhajans, when he would do the bhajan, he would dance and he would leap and he would take such huge leaps that even in open space he could leap across the road. That kind of a dance, ecstasy he would dance in. That Daivarata has asked Bhagavan as to what is the most important duty. And for us, in the practice of self-inquiry, Bhagavan's answer becomes a very important support. Because Bhagavan says, self-abidance is the highest duty. So whenever the mind turns to self-inquiry, naturally, one need not hesitate to put aside whatever else one may be doing at that time. This again, Sri Ramanacentre would emphasize regularly in his sharings that when the mood for self-inquiry comes, put aside everything else and get into self-inquiry. But how would the mood for self-inquiry come unless one recognizes that self-abidance is the most important duty that we have to perform? Because otherwise the mind will tell us, this is important, that is important, this needs to get done, that needs to get done. Even after listening to Bhagavan telling us that is the most important duty, it takes time for us to wean the mind from its habit of giving importance to many things. And Daivarata also told Bhagavan, give me only one duty, only one. That Eka Chintana is very, very important in our practice. If we have multiple goals, then the attention, the power of the mind gets divided. It pursues all these various things. It gets divided between these pursuits and it will keep moving from one to the other. But if it has only one goal, if it has only a single goal, then it will not be worried by anything else. It will not be shifting from A to B to C to D, which is its normal nature. The usual nature of the mind is to keep shifting from one to the other. Therefore, the purpose of all sadhana all spiritual practice is actually to bring the mind into unifocus. Normally, that is the purpose of any spiritual practice. In self-inquiry, the difference between other spiritual practices and self-inquiry is that in other spiritual practices, the focus, the single focus is on some object. It may be on the japa, on the form of the Lord, or it may be on any other single object. But like sometimes a single object may be the thought, I am Brahman. Like that, there may be different thoughts which are there. These will also be considered, and the questions will be taken up by Ganapati Muni in the next chapter. So the single focus may be on many things, and Bhagavan has said sadhana as a single focus. It could be, the single focus can be music, dance, it can be selfless service, it can be truth. So the single focus we can have on any object, and that will make the mind absolutely strong to turn within in self-inquiry. It gives strength to the mind. The unifocus will give strength to the mind. However, in self-inquiry, that unifocus is turned to the very subject, to the very I. There is no object other than the I itself. Because one asks oneself, who am I? And one seeks to know who I am by trying to pay attention to the very feeling of I, or the thought I. By trying to focus on that, we are asking ourselves, who am I? This is the difference between self-inquiry and other forms of spiritual practice. In the earlier verse of this chapter, Daivarata, upon being told that self-abidance is the only or the highest duty cast upon a human being, has asked Bhagavan how to become steadily self-aware, and Bhagavan said, one must remain in the non-objective, achale nirupadhike, he told us. He told us that we should remain without objective attention. We must turn the mind back to the self, turn it away from all objects. So Devarata had some other questions as well after that. And he said that should we be performing any of our normal, should we continue to perform our prescribed duties? Because Bhagavan says this is the highest duty. What about other prescribed duties, the niyamas? Bhagavan says carry on with them until they drop off by themselves. Devarata asks the last question, which is of this chapter, which is that what about mantra sadhana? If one does mantra japa, can one attain the same goal which one would attain by turning the mind back to its source? And Bhagavan answers, Achanchalena manasa mantrair japtair nirantaram siddhisyat shraddhadhananam japtera pranave namah. Bhagavan says that if one is doing the japa, the chanting of any sacred syllables or of the pranava om, if such japa, such repetition of the sacred syllables is unwavering, achanchala, and if it is nirantaram, if it is continuous, then it will take one to study self-avoidance. To Shiva Prakasham Pillai, Bhagavan says, Japam Vichara Sadhanam. That's what Shiva Prakasham Pillai has recorded in his Ramana Padamale. Japam Vichara Sadhanamam என்று உரைப்போன் பாதம் வாழ்கவே. It says that japa is conducive to do Atma Vichara. And we find that Bhagavan has guided Ganapati Muni also in the manner of doing the japa, which is equivalent to Atma Vichara. That is, by finding out the source of the mantra nada. Find out from where the source, the sound of the mantra arises and merge at its source, says Bhagavan to Ganapati Muni in the historic first meeting that they have. In that first meeting as Guru and disciple, which they have, when Muni surrenders to Bhagavan and gets the Upadesha from him, direct Upadesha from him. But here Bhagavan is adding a couple of riders. He says the japa sadhana should be continuous. In fact, these two words which Bhagavan has given here with reference to japa sadhana are very, very essential in Bhagavan's teachings. He has emphasized this in every case, whether it's Vishwanatha Swami or whether it is N.R. Krishnamurti Iyer. Whenever he is talking of japa sadhana, he has talked about the need to make it continuous. He told Vishwanatha Swami also to do continuous chanting of the Gayatri mantra, which he had already been initiated into by his father and which he was practicing. Bhagavan told him to do it nirantaram. Similarly to N.R. Krishnamurti Iyer, who was doing the Rama Japa, he said it should go on, the mantra should go on like Mahavishnu's Sudarshana Chakra. Incessantly, it should keep going round and round. So, Bhagavan is saying, Mantre Japte Nirantaram. And with what kind of a mind? Achanchalena Manasa. The mind should not be wavering. The mind should be steady. With a steady mind, if one keeps on practicing the japa. How to practice the japa? Bhagavan has told Ganapati Muni, watch from where the nada, japa nada arises and into which source it subsides. So every time the one mantra nama is said, we watch its rise and we watch its subsidence into the source. And this process should be continuous, says Bhagavan. About Atma Vichara also, Bhagavan says it should be continuous. In his Appalam song, he says, Santatam Salipara Santosha Mahave Appalam Ittuparu. Kal nengil nan என்று கலங்காமல் உன்முக உலக்கையால் ஓயாதிடுத்து. So he says, without any break, keep on pounding, keep on pounding, keep on. Why is it necessary to do it continuously? The Atma Vichara or the Japa Sadhana? What is the need to do it all the time? I have shared earlier also that Vishwanatha Swami told me that I could do it or I should do it in all my spare time. Apart from what was the Nitya Karma or the Niyamas that I had to follow being a student. So the remaining time he asked me to give to the pursuit of the japa sadhana. Now, the Atma Vichara also has to be done Nirantaram. It should also be done Achanchala Manasa only. Because if the mind is wavering, then one gets caught in the objects. As I said, the purpose is actually to make the mind Achanchala. Japa becomes an aid. Instead of dropping all objects, one can hold on to a single object. The other example which Bhagavan gives is of the elephant. He says the elephant keeps moving its trunk. It cannot keep its trunk still for even 1 second. So if it's moving somewhere on the street, if there are shops on either side, it will keep on picking up something, or else it may disturb the people on the street. But if the Mahut gives it a stick to hold, it does not get disturbed. It holds the stick alone. So Bhagavan says, give the mind enquiry. Give the mind, otherwise, if not enquiry, then japa. Give it japa. And Bhagavan says, if the mind is occupied like this, vrittirjapena mantranam shuddhasya pranavasya va vishayebhyah paravritya swaswarupatmika bhavet. The purpose of japa is the same as the purpose of self-inquiry. That must not be forgotten. And here also, the question by Devarata must be remembered. Devarata asks, can I achieve that same goal of abidance in the self? And even in the previous second chapter, already Bhagavan has said that the goal is Atmanishta. He has said the Kartavya, highest duty, is Atmanishta. So how can japa help us in Atmanishta? Bhagavan says, when one is doing japa, the mind is not turning towards any other objects, especially if one is doing japa continuously. Then what happens to the mind? Vishayebhyah paravritya. The mind turns away from objects. Vrittirjapena mantranam shuddhasya pranavasya va. So when one is doing the japa or the pranava, what happens? The mind turns away from objects and it becomes swaswarupatmika bhavet. It turns away from object. So the mantra, you see, because the mantra rises and the mantra subsides. And there will be a gap. That gap may not be perceptible in the beginning. One may not be aware of it. But if one does not allow the mind to go to any other thoughts, but remain only with the japa, every time the japa subsides, attention will also automatically dive into or subside in the self. Gradually, that consciousness, that awareness, that taste of the self will take over. That will become more predominant and the mantra will get subsumed. The mantra will get consumed by the self, says Bhagavan over here. In Atma Vichara, one directly seeks the self. In Atma Vichara, through mantra japa, one seeks the self, the source of the mantra nada, by which one gets back again into the same source. And this, whether it is pure Atma Vichara or Atma Vichara aided by mantra japa, where one is seeking the source of the mantra nada, the most important clue which Bhagavan is giving us in this chapter is that it should be continuous. It should be ajyadhara. It should be continuous. And for that, remembering that it is the most important duty will be a great support in our lives. Why should I do anything else? Yes, I can do whatever is the observance, the niyama alone. Other than Atma Vichara, I should only be doing whatever are the prescribed niyamas. What are the prescribed niyamas? That which is brought to me, that which is my responsibility, my basic responsibility in the roles which I have been given to play today. Therefore, let us not take on anything beyond that, and there is no need to think of anything other than that. Niyamas can go on automatically, the observance of basic disciplines can go on, and all the time, the rest of the time is to be given to the pursuit of self-inquiry. In Japa Sadhana, Bhagavan also gives one more clue to Mrs. Khanna, where he says that I is the first mantra, I. So he says one can repeat I. The Aham Spurana is the Anubhava. There one is not repeating, but one can repeat it also. If one repeats to oneself I or Nan or Nanu, Nanu or Nenu, whichever is the language, or me, whichever is the language in which one is saying I, which one is used to saying I, if one repeats to oneself that syllable, it takes the attention to the core of the I feeling. So the mantra japa can be of the I also. I. When one says I itself, what happens? The attention gets back to the I. In self-inquiry, one is not even saying I. One doesn't say anything. But if one wants to do mantra japa, if one wants to take the support of mantra japa, one may do. If one is already initiated into some mantra japa, one can do that. Or if one is doing the Ramana Nama, one can do that. Or else, if one finds that the mind is disturbed, one can take the support of mantra sadhana and repeat the I until the mind quietens, and then turn it back again to the source through self-inquiry and abidance. Abiding as the source, getting back and abiding as the source, remembering that nothing else matters, remembering by that supreme grace that nothing else matters, and by that very grace, abiding as the self. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri.
Thank you, Akka. Apara Satchit Sukavadirashe Yasyorvimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami. Namo Ramanath. Thank you all.
Namo